Horror movies are filled with killers, but not all slashers are created equal. Some are just ordinary humans with knives, others are something far worse. Unstoppable forces that continue hunting no matter how far you run, how hard you fight, or how carefully you prepare. These are killers that have left behind mountains of bodies and some of the highest kill counts in horror history. In this video, we'll be taking a look at movie slashers you realistically cannot survive. We'll break down their abilities, hunting methods, strengths, weaknesses, and most importantly, whether an average person would have any chance of making it out alive. From supernatural revenants and seemingly immortal murderers, to killers that can appear almost anywhere at any time. These are the slashers that turn survival into near impossibility. And unlike monsters, aliens, or giant creatures, slashers are often far more personal. They stalk you, they study you, they wait for the perfect moment to strike. And once they've decided you're the target, escaping becomes a lot easier said than done. So with that being said, lock your doors, check behind you, and let's take a look at movie slashers you cannot survive. Art the Clown from Terrifier is a perfect example of a slasher you realistically do not want to encounter. While many horror killers simply murder their victims and move on, Art takes pleasure in inflicting as much suffering as possible before the kill. In fact, death is often the least horrific outcome when dealing with him. His victims are frequently subjected to prolonged torture, mutilation, and psychological torment, making him one of the most sadistic slashers in modern horror. At first glance, Art appears to be nothing more than a thin man dressed as a clown. He wears a black and white costume, paints his face pale with exaggerated black features, and carries a trash bag filled with various weapons. But beneath the costume is something far more disturbing. As the films progress, his appearance becomes increasingly unnatural, with rotting teeth, sunken facial features, unnerving eyes, and increasingly demonic traits that reflect his supernatural nature. What separates Art from many other slashers is his personality. He isn't silent because he's emotionless, quite the opposite. Art is incredibly expressive. He mocks, taunts, laughs, applauds, and entertains himself through his attacks. He treats murder like a performance. Whether he's torturing a victim, setting up a gruesome display, or silently celebrating his latest kill, everything is done with a twisted sense of humor. That unpredictability makes him even more dangerous because there are no rules governing his behavior. And unfortunately, fighting back doesn't guarantee survival. Before gaining supernatural abilities, Art was already incredibly dangerous. He possessed remarkable strength, extreme pain tolerance, and an ability to continue attacking despite severe injuries. But after his resurrection, the threat level increased dramatically. Art gained superhuman strength, allowing him to tear limbs apart, crush skulls, rip through flesh with his bare hands, and overpower most people effortlessly. He can survive gunshots, stabbings, severe trauma, and even decapitation. At various points, he regenerates lost body parts, reattaches his own head, and continues functioning despite injuries that would instantly kill any normal human being. His kill count alone demonstrates how difficult he is to stop. Throughout the Terrifier films, Art leaves behind dozens upon dozens of victims, many of whom had opportunities to escape, fight back, or defend themselves. Yet time and time again he manages to close the distance, overwhelm them, and even turn simple encounters into extended nightmares. His willingness to use firearms, blunt weapons, edged weapons, traps, explosives, and anything else available makes him far more versatile than the average slasher. So what are your chances of surviving Art the Clown? Honestly, they're extremely poor. Unlike killers such as Michael Myers, who often focuses on specific targets, Art appears willing to kill almost anyone he encounters. He doesn't require a motive. He doesn't need a reason. And if he becomes interested in you, he'll often stalk and terrorize you long before the actual attack begins. Even if you manage to injure him, his supernatural durability allows him to keep coming. And because he enjoys prolonged suffering, a quick death isn't something you can count on. But perhaps the most terrifying thing about Art is that he genuinely enjoys what he's doing. He's not driven by revenge, he's not following a curse, he's not carrying out a mission. Art hurts people because he loves it. And when a killer enjoys a hunt that much, survival becomes a lot harder than simply running away. Chucky from the Child's Play franchise is a perfect example of why appearances can be deceiving. At first glance, he looks almost harmless, a small plastic doll standing barely over 2 feet tall with bright red hair, freckles, and a cheerful smile. Most people's first instinct would be to laugh rather than to run. Unfortunately, that underestimation is exactly what has allowed Chucky to build one of the largest body counts in slasher history. Behind the toy-like appearance is the soul of Charles Lee Ray, a sadistic serial killer whose cruelty and determination have made him one of horror's most persistent murderers. Unlike many slashers who rely primarily on brute force, Chucky survives because of his intelligence. He is manipulative, patient, and incredibly resourceful. Despite being trapped inside a doll's body, he possesses the strength of an adult human, allowing him to overpower victims far larger than himself. Over the years, he has used virtually anything as a weapon. Knives, firearms, chainsaws, explosives, electricity, poison, traps, vehicles, and even other people. If there's an object nearby, Chucky can usually find a way to turn it into a murder weapon. What makes him especially dangerous is his personality. Chucky isn't simply a killer, he genuinely enjoys killing. He is arrogant, foul-mouthed, sadistic, and completely devoid of empathy. He takes pleasure in tormenting his victims psychologically before murdering them, and often goes out of his way to make deaths as cruel or humiliating as possible. Even worse, he holds grudges for decades, and will relentlessly pursue anyone who has wronged him, making escape a temporary solution at best. And then there's the biggest problem. Chucky simply refuses to stay dead. Throughout the franchise, he has been burned, blown apart, shredded, melted, decapitated, shot, dismembered, crushed, exorcised, and destroyed countless times. Yet somehow he always finds a way back. Through voodoo magic, soul transfers, possession, and later the ability to split his soul into multiple bodies, Chucky effectively transformed himself from a single killer into an ongoing supernatural threat. At one point, multiple Chucky dolls were operating simultaneously, making it nearly impossible to eliminate him completely. Perhaps the most terrifying aspect of Chucky is how difficult he is to identify initially. Unlike Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees, who are immediately recognizable threats, Chucky can hide in plain sight. He's a toy. He can sit motionless on a shelf, in a child's bedroom, inside a store, or in the backseat of a car while waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. By the time any victims realize he's alive, he's already close enough to attack. Now, to be fair, Chucky does have weaknesses. His arrogance frequently causes problems for him, and physically he remains much smaller than most slashers. Strong adults who know exactly what they're dealing with can overpower him. Holy water, exorcisms, and certain voodoo limitations have also proven effective at various points in the franchise. But the problem is that very few people get that preparation time. Most victims don't know Chucky exists until he's already inside their home. Few slashers are as completely unfair as Freddy Krueger from Nightmare on Elm Street. Most killers have limitations. You can run from them, hide from them, lock your doors, call the police. Freddy removes all those options because his hunting ground isn't in the real world. It's your own mind. And unfortunately, sleeping isn't optional. Physically, Freddy is instantly recognizable. His burned and disfigured face, red and green striped sweater, fedora, and razor-clawed glove have become some of the most iconic images in horror history. But the glove itself is honestly the least dangerous thing about him. The real threat comes from what Freddy can do once you're asleep. Within the dream world, he essentially becomes a god. He can reshape reality however he wants, alter the environment, transform his victims, manipulate gravity, become gigantic, appear anywhere instantly, and weaponize a person's deepest fears against them. The normal rules of survival simply stop applying. What makes Freddy especially terrifying is that he doesn't rush. Unlike many slashers who kill quickly, Freddy often spends days or even weeks psychologically tormenting his targets before the final attack. He enjoys wearing people down mentally, forcing them to fear sleep itself. Victims become exhausted, paranoid, isolated, and increasingly desperate as they try to stay awake. And eventually, everyone loses that battle. No matter how determined you are, the human body will eventually force you to sleep. And once you fall asleep, things become incredibly one-sided. Freddy specifically targets whatever frightens you most. If you're afraid of heights, drowning, insects, fire, isolation, failure, or death itself, he'll use those fears against you. The dream world is his personal playground, and because he controls it completely, escaping is almost impossible unless you know exactly what you're dealing with. Even worse, injuries and deaths suffered in dreams often manifest in reality, meaning dying in the nightmare usually means dying for real. To make matters worse, Freddy isn't just powerful, he's intelligent. He understands psychology, manipulation, and fear better than almost any slasher. He constantly taunts victims, tricks them into lowering their guard, and uses false hope against them. In many cases, people think they've escaped the nightmare only to discover they're trapped inside it. That uncertainty makes every encounter feel hopeless because you can never be entirely sure what's real and what isn't. Now, technically, Freddy does have weaknesses. He can be pulled into the real world, where he loses many of his supernatural abilities and becomes vulnerable to conventional harm. Fire has also historically been associated with his defeats, and if people stop fearing him and remembering him, his power can diminish significantly. But realistically, very few victims possess the knowledge, preparation, or mental strength necessary to exploit those weaknesses before Freddy gets to them. Unlike some slashers, Ghostface isn't a supernatural monster. There are no magical powers, no curses, and no immortality. Every Ghostface is ultimately a human being hiding behind a mask. And yet, despite that fact, the Ghostface killers have collectively built one of the most impressive kill counts in slasher history. The reason is simple: they don't rely on supernatural abilities. They rely on planning, deception, and fear. The appearance of Ghostface has remained largely unchanged throughout the franchise. A flowing black robe, a hood, black gloves, and the iconic screaming white mask have become instantly recognizable symbols of horror. The costume itself isn't unique, and can be purchased by almost anyone, which is exactly what makes it so effective. Ghostface can be anyone: a friend, a classmate, a neighbor, a family member. The killer often spends weeks or even months blending into everyday life before revealing themselves when it's already too late. What truly separates Ghostface from other slashers is the psychological aspect of the hunt. Before the attack even begins, victims are frequently stalked, watched, manipulated, and terrorized through phone calls. Ghostface enjoys playing games with targets, asking questions, making threats, discussing horror movies, and slowly building tension before striking. The killer isn't simply trying to murder you. They want you afraid first. They want you to constantly be looking over your shoulder, wondering who around you can actually be trusted. And honestly, that's where Ghostface becomes far more dangerous than people give them credit for. Most slashers announce their presence. You know when Jason is coming. You know when Michael Myers is nearby. Ghostface often attacks before you even realize you're part of the game. They gather information, learn routines, identify weaknesses, and use that knowledge to isolate victims. Many Ghostface killers have demonstrated surprising levels of intelligence, stealth, and adaptability, often anticipating where their targets will flee before they even make the decision themselves. Physically, Ghostface is still a serious threat. While each killer differs slightly, most possess above average strength, impressive pain tolerance, and considerable skill with knives. Throughout the series, Ghostface has overpowered police officers, athletes, security personnel, and physically larger opponents. They frequently survive gunshot wounds, stab wounds, blunt force trauma, and severe injuries long enough to continue pursuing victims. Some versions even wear body armor beneath the costume, making them far harder to stop than they initially appear. That being said, Ghostface does have weaknesses. Ghostface is ultimately human. They make mistakes, they trip, they get distracted, they can be injured, restrained, shot, and killed. In fact, many Ghostface killers ultimately lose because of their overconfidence, arrogance, or simply underestimating their victims. If you know who you're dealing with and have time to prepare, your odds are significantly higher than against most supernatural slashers. Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th represents a point where slasher stops feeling like a human killer and starts feeling like a force of nature. While many horror villains rely on stealth, manipulation, or psychological games, Jason's approach is much simpler. He finds you, he follows you, and eventually, he catches you. The terrifying part is that no matter how much punishment he takes along the way, he just keeps coming. Most people recognize Jason by his iconic hockey mask and machete, but his appearance has changed dramatically throughout the franchise. In life, Jason was a severely deformed boy who drowned at Camp Crystal Lake. After returning from the dead, his body gradually transformed from a scarred human into a decaying undead revenant. Depending on the film, he appears as a rotting corpse, a heavily decomposed zombie, or even a cybernetically enhanced killing machine in the far future. Despite these changes, one thing remains consistent. Jason is enormous, standing well over 6 feet tall with a powerful build. He towers over most victims and often looks less like a man and more like a walking tank. What makes Jason particularly frightening is how relentless he is. He doesn't taunt victims like Freddy. He doesn't play games like Ghostface. He rarely even shows emotion. Once someone enters his territory or attracts his attention, Jason becomes completely focused on eliminating them. He will walk through forests, lakes, buildings, storms, and entire crowds if it means reaching his target. Even when people believe they've escaped, Jason somehow manages to reappear ahead of them, leading many fans to joke that he can teleport. Whether that's supernatural movement or simply creative filmmaking, the result is the same. Distance rarely keeps you safe. His physical capabilities are equally terrifying. Jason can punch through walls, crush skulls with his bare hands, rip limbs from bodies, throw grown adults across rooms, and survive injuries that would instantly kill any normal human. Bullets, knives, axes, fire, electrocution, explosions, or even being submerged for years have all failed to stop him permanently. Once Jason became undead, his durability reached a level where conventional weapons became little more than temporary inconveniences. And unlike many slashers who have a preferred method of killing, Jason is remarkably adaptive. The machete may be his signature weapon, but throughout the franchise, he has killed people with practically anything he can get his hands on. Tools, weapons, furniture, environmental hazards, machinery, even sleeping bags. If an object exists nearby, Jason can probably find a way to turn it into a murder weapon. That makes planning against him incredibly difficult because there's no single attack pattern to anticipate. That being said, Jason isn't completely without weaknesses. His attachment to his mother has been exploited multiple times, and certain individuals have successfully manipulated him by impersonating Pamela Voorhees. He also seems to avoid harming children and animals, showing that some fragments of humanity still remain buried beneath the monster. But those rare weaknesses don't change the reality facing most victims. The overwhelming majority never get close enough to exploit them before Jason reaches them first. Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw doesn't possess magical powers or impossible abilities, but it doesn't make him any less terrifying. In many ways, Leatherface is scary because he feels real. He's a massive, unstable killer living in the middle of nowhere, with a family that's just as dangerous as he is. And if you wander into his territory, there's a very good chance that you're never coming back out. Standing well over 6 feet tall and suffering from acromegaly, Leatherface is an imposing figure even before you factor in the chainsaw. His enormous size, brute strength, and intimidating appearance make him look more like a monster than a man. Covering his face are masks crafted from the skin of his victims, each one reflecting a different aspect of his fractured personality. Combined with his blood-stained clothing and roaring chainsaw, the result is one of the most unsettling appearances in horror history. What separates Leatherface from many other slashers is that he isn't purely evil in the traditional sense. Beneath the violence is a mentally unstable individual who has spent his entire life under the influence of an abusive and cannibalistic family. Depending on the film, he often behaves more like a frightened, confused animal than a calculated murderer. He experiences fear, panic, attachment, and even affection. However, none of those traits make him any less dangerous. If anything, they make him more unpredictable, because his reactions are often driven by emotion rather than logic. And once Leatherface decides you're an intruder, things get very bad very quick. Leatherface often attacks with overwhelming speed and brutality. Many of his most famous kills happen within seconds. A single strike from his hammer can incapacitate someone instantly, while a chainsaw can turn even a minor mistake into a fatal injury. His preferred tactic is simple: overwhelm the victim before they even understand what's happening. By the time most people realize they're in danger, they're already trapped inside his territory. Another major problem is that you're rarely dealing with Leatherface alone. The Sawyer family functions almost like a hunting pack. While Leatherface serves as the primary threat, other family members frequently assist in capturing, tormenting, and disposing of victims. Even if you somehow manage to evade Leatherface himself, you may still find yourself surrounded by people actively helping him. That makes escaping much harder than simply outrunning one killer. Physically, Leatherface is far stronger than most normal humans. He can break bones, overpower multiple victims, smash through obstacles, and continue fighting despite severe injuries. Throughout the franchise, he survives gunshot wounds, stab wounds, burns, chainsaw injuries, vehicle impacts, and numerous other forms of trauma that would put most people out of action. While he can certainly be killed, actually doing so before he reaches you is far easier said than done. Leatherface does have one important weakness. He's still human. He can bleed, he can be injured, he can be outsmarted. Victims have escaped him before, and determined individuals with weapons stand a legitimate chance of fighting back. If you're armed, aware of the danger, and able to stay calm, survival is possible. For a slasher whose entire reputation is built around being human, Michael Myers is disturbingly difficult to explain. On paper, he's just a man wearing overalls and a white mask. Yet throughout the Halloween franchise, he repeatedly survives injuries, performs feats of strength that should be impossible, and appears almost supernatural in the way he stalks his victims. That's why many characters don't refer to him as a man at all. They call him the Shape, something that looks human, but isn't quite human anymore. Michael's story begins on Halloween night in 1963, when at only 6 years old, he brutally murdered his older sister Judith without any apparent motive. Afterward, he simply stood outside holding the knife, showing no emotion, no remorse, and offering no explanation. He would spend the next 15 years confined to a mental institution where Dr. Samuel Loomis attempted to understand him. What Loomis eventually concluded was there was nothing behind Michael's eyes except pure evil. Physically, Michael isn't as impressive as Jason Voorhees or as grotesque as Leatherface. He typically appears as a tall man, wearing mechanic overalls, black boots, and his iconic white mask. Yet that simplicity is exactly what makes him so unsettling. There are no scars on display, no dramatic costume, no monstrous features, just a blank expressionless face staring back at you. The mask strips away any humanity he may have had and turns him into something that feels more like a living embodiment of death than a person. Most killers attack when they see an opportunity. Michael studies people, he watches from a distance, he follows routines, he learns habits, and when he finally strikes, it's often hours or even days of stalking. Victims frequently catch brief glimpses of him standing in the distance, only for him to disappear moments later. This constant surveillance creates an overwhelming sense of paranoia, because once Michael becomes interested in you, there's a very real chance he's already watching long before you realize it. And despite rarely speaking or showing emotion, Michael possesses a surprisingly intelligent and calculated mind. He carefully stages bodies, creates disturbing displays, and uses psychological warfare to terrify survivors. Throughout the franchise, he repeatedly demonstrates tactical thinking, setting traps, ambushes, and manipulating his environment to maximize fear. He isn't simply killing people, he's creating horror. Then there's the problem of actually stopping him. Michael possesses immense strength, allowing him to lift grown adults off the ground, breaking through walls, crush bones, and overpower multiple opponents with ease. His durability is equally absurd. He survived gunshots, stabbings, burns, falls, explosions, vehicle impacts, and countless other injuries that would instantly kill a normal person. In several timelines, he even demonstrates regenerative abilities, recovering from injuries that should permanently disable him. While different versions of Michael vary in power, almost all share the same terrifying trait. They simply refuse to stay down. Unlike Freddy Krueger, Michael doesn't need dreams. Unlike Ghostface, he doesn't need a disguise. Unlike Leatherface, he doesn't need his family. He only needs time. And eventually everyone runs out of time. So could you survive Michael Myers? If you're lucky enough to escape his attention entirely, maybe. If he chooses you as a target, however, your chances begin dropping rapidly. Michael has spent decades proving that locked doors, firearms, police intervention, and even determined survivors are often little more than temporary obstacles. The only thing more frightening than seeing Michael Myers standing at the end of the street is looking away for a second and realizing he's gone. So after looking at some of the most infamous slashers in horror history, one thing becomes pretty clear. Surviving these killers is about a lot more than simply running away. Some, like Ghostface and Leatherface, are technically human and can be stopped, but even then, they rely on fear, surprise, and overwhelming violence to stack the odds heavily in their favor. Others go far beyond human limitations. Michael Myers refuses to stay down. Jason Voorhees shrugs off injuries that would kill anyone else. Chucky keeps finding ways to come back. And Freddy Krueger removes the one thing every person eventually needs: sleep. What makes these slashers so terrifying isn't just their body count. It's the fact that each of them attacks from a different angle. Some stalk you, some manipulate you, some hunt you relentlessly. And some don't even need to enter the real world to kill you. No matter how prepared you think you are, every one of these killers has found ways to overcome victims who believed they had a plan. And honestly, that's why they've remained horror icons for decades. They're not just murderers, they're nightmares that refuse to die. But anyways, let me know down below which slasher you think would be the absolute hardest to survive, and if there are any horror villains or movie monsters you'd like to see covered in a future video. Keep the lights on, check behind you, and if you hear something strange in the middle of the night, maybe don't go investigate it. And until next time, friends.